Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our afternoon sessions. I hope everyone has enjoyed lunch, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome Professor Anthony Michael Esolen of Providence College, Professor of English at Providence College, who will give us a talk on the title, The Mighty Child, Visions of Youth in Dante and Shakespeare. Professor Esolen has made major contributions to the world of letters in a stunning variety of venues, as a translator, a scholar, a public intellectual, and a poet. His translations of Dante, Lucretius, and Tasso are widely praised for their combination of erudition, accuracy, and freshness. And I think anyone who's ever tried to translate anything can appreciate how rare it is that those three characteristics are combined in one work. In the world of academic specialization, he's published scholarly work on Shakespeare and Spenser, as well as Dante, Lucretius, and Tasso. Exhibiting his gifts of witty and satirical social commentary, he has addressed the wider public with two recent books, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Western Civilization, and, my favorite, 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child. And I think about 8 of them are regularly exhibited not only on children, but on college students as well. But finally, Professor Esolen is the author of Ironies of Faith, a highly regarded study of irony in Christian authors ranging all the way from Augustine to Dostoevsky. It is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Esolen, and based on all of his many accomplishments and wide range of learning, I think we can look forward to a very stimulating talk. Professor Esolen.
Thank you, Professor McKenney. I'd like to say to you all that if you do like the things that I write there, this is the magazine to get, Touchstone Magazine, edited. I'm one of the editors for it, but we've got a table upstairs with Touchstone magazines. You can sign up for subscription. It's written by a cadre of Catholics and conservative Protestants and Eastern Orthodox writers, and I can't recommend it highly enough. If it weren't for Touchstone, I might not be standing here right now. My second time in Indiana, the first time I lost by one vote a job at Wabash College down the road. You may know of it. Yeah, okay. And here I am at Notre Dame. All right, the mighty child. The revolution in human thought, the overturning of all of our oldest, most sensible, and utterly hopeless visions of power and glory, had only just begun. The disciples of Jesus, who no doubt thought of themselves as his friends, yet whose incomprehension so often leaves him alone to look upon them and patiently wait for them to see at last and come to him in love. These same disciples, even the sons of thunder, have been quarreling over who should be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. I should like to say that it is the ancient quarrel. It's the quarrel of age against the child. Ye shall be as gods, whispers the serpent into the soul of Eve, insinuating into her the old lie, the primal lie, that to enjoy power is to wield power over, and that to be is to be wonderfully alone and against. I think it is an essentially materialist lie, that of the self, not so much robed in humble flesh as reduced to it, and so in the moral life condensed into an atom of self-will, colliding with other atoms of self-will in an old and decaying world. In such a world, it is necessary to be grown and strong, like a Machiavellian prince. It is pitiable to be small and weak, to be, as Saint Thérèse of Lisieux puts it with such insouciance, to be an atom of Jesus. In such a world, we long to shed the embarrassment of dependency. And we say with the Illuminati that the time of our tutelage is past now, and we will think for ourselves. Or we nod in agreement with Bacon. We unstrap our belts. We ungird our loins to have our way with the natural world. And we sneer at those scholastic philosophers of being, like St. Thomas, who we say are like mere boys who talk big and perform little. It's the lie that hardens the heart of the almost humane Lucretius, whose wise man stands alone on a promontory and derives sweet pleasure from the sight of someone else's ship going down in a storm. Not that the man's distress is cause for mirth, says he. There is precious little mirth in Lucretius of any kind. Not that the man's distress is cause for mirth. Your freedom from those troubles is what's sweet. I would say such is the human union of the secularist, by the way, and there you go. It is the lie that causes Lucretius' great admirer, the materialist Thomas Hobbes, to see in pre-political man nothing more than the war of all against all, and to prescribe as remedy for that war not love, not conversion of heart, but the artificial restraint upon enmity imposed by that hulking, ancient, inhuman god called Leviathan, or the state. Of course, Eve didn't need to wait for the confused elaborations upon sin provided by the centuries that would culminate in the wisdom of Lucretius or Hobbes. She could see the alienation for herself right away. She and Adam, we are told, were ashamed of themselves, ashamed of one another, and ashamed before God. They cowered. They tried to shift the blame, Adam to Eve, Eve to the serpent, and by implication to God himself. Exiled from Eden, they would beget 2 sons, and Cain, the elder, presumably the stronger, would kill the younger Abel in envy, and then go forth in exile himself to become, like that other legendary fratricide, Romulus, the builder of a city. An old story, indeed. So there stands Jesus, beset with the agedness of his disciples. And he called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted, and become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I think it profitable to see this moment in the light of 2 others in Scripture. When one of the scribes came to Jesus and asked which was the first commandment of all, meaning both the greatest and, in a sense, the earliest, the youngest, the one from which all the other commandments spring, Jesus answers with those stirring words that make us one in love with the one God. He says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like unto it, namely this, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And when the scribe agrees with a kind of childlike readiness and enthusiasm, Jesus says to him, Thou art not far from the kingdom of God. It is like what he said to Nicodemus, the Pharisee who saw him and wondered at his miracles, and said that God must be with him. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, said Jesus, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. These scenes, in my mind anyway, form a triptych of youth. It's not simply that we must empty ourselves before we can be filled with the grace of God. For the child here is more than a symbol of weakness. Where I'm weak, says St. Paul, there am I strong. And so too when we become like little children, when we are born anew, we put on that new child, not our old child, but this new child who is Christ, in whose might we too have the might to love God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Balding old men, sorry if there are any here, balding old men with heavy jowls they may sculpt in Rome, senators with the cares of state and of bitter faction furrowing their wise and weary brows. Or they may stuff the refuse heap in Carthage with the bones, the little bones, of those who, as von Balthasar says, are always the first to be sacrificed. Children, always the first, that is, in lands beyond the covenants, old and new. Or they may mortgage their innocence to what Father Sayward calls the Victorian cult of progress, or every post-Enlightenment myth of a world come of age. I think the operative word there is age. But the future belongs to the child and the hosts of children who love him. The youth of Christ and the age of the world. I wish to meditate upon these now, touching upon scenes from our heritage of Christian art. It seems to me that there is nothing new in our current materialism, nor anything capable of effecting a renewal, either in the life of an individual or in the life of a culture. It is not only old, it is senescent, or if I may coin a word, senescent. It ages those who consume it, bringing them no wisdom, but a horrible parody of childhood, the dilapidated cult of youth. It is not silly, to use that fine word from Middle English that dances between blessedness and the giddiness of a fool. No, it is shot through with what Lewis's Screwtape calls the realism, dignity, and austerity of hell. It is for those who are grim and flippant at once. For instance, the physicist Steven Weinberg, who says that the only use that our study of the universe serves, the only use, not to expand our souls in wonder, the only use it serves is to raise our condition from farce to tragedy. That is the snarling or sobbing sentence of a man who might be able to agree with the preacher when he says, "The heart of fools is in the house of mirth," but never agree with that even wiser psalmist who says, "I shall go in unto the altar of God, the God who gives strength to my youth." For materialism, both as an ontology and a guide for life, is not simple but simplistic, not humble but humiliating. Its characteristic adverb is only, as it seeks not to instill wonder, not to cause the heart to leap before the lovely earth, to call like Shakespeare's Prospero upon elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes, and groves. But as it boasts, its object is to disillusion and to dishearten. It replaces love with sexual excitation or enlightened self-interest. It replaces the church with the collective. Does it breed works of beauty? It cannot even breed children sufficient to replace one generation with the next. So first then, let us visit a cemetery. This scene is from Boccaccio's Decameron, the 9th story of the 6th day. In the old days, says the narrator Alyssa, Florentines used to observe, quote, certain excellent and commendable customs, which have fallen into disuse because of avarice, which grew as the city grew rich. One such custom was that wealthy young men of the city would entertain one another in their homes, after dressing up in similar garb and parading through the city, or after playing at tournament sports in the piazzas, especially, quote, on the principal feasts, or when the news of some happy event had reached the city, such as victory in the field. Boccaccio leaves it unclear what is uppermost in the minds of these young men, whether they feast because of their love of their countrymen or their devotion to the patron saints of their town, or whether the feasts give them the excuse to indulge in lavish entertainment. They thus form a transition between the genuine feasts of old Florence and the drab avarice of new Florence. And in this light, we are to view their attempt to enlist among their number the poet and the natural philosopher Guido Cavalcanti. They want him to join them Boccaccio says, not only because he outshone all his contemporaries in every activity pertaining to a gentleman that he chose to undertake, but most of all because, quote, he was extremely rich and could entertain most sumptuously those people whom he happened to consider worthy of his attention. But Guido has long resisted these young men. Their leader, Messer Betto Brunelleschi, thought that it was because Guido had separated himself from his fellow men by his passion for speculative reasoning, a passion which gave Guido the reputation of an Epicurean, a materialist, who spent his time wondering, quote, whether it could be shown that God did not exist. So then one day, Guido took one of his favorite walks through a churchyard full of marble tombs. That is itself most significant, as we'll see. But Brunelleschi and his companions come upon him there. The leader cries out in jest, "Hey, Guido, you spurn our company, but supposing you find that God does not exist, what good will it do you?" A question that somebody ought to ask Richard Dawkins, by the way. Now, rather than take up the jest or join the young men in their entertainment, Guido replies in such a way as to confirm his sense of mature superiority and his isolation. "Gentlemen," he says, "in your own house you may say whatever you like to me." And he places his hand on one of the tombs, vaults over it, and leaves them behind, proceeding on his way. Brunelleschi interprets the remark, saying that Guido meant to put them down as unlettered and uncouth, and therefore, quote, worse off than the dead. Seems a poor enough joke. It's not obvious that Guido genuinely vaults over the dead by affirming that in the end there is nothing but the dead. The ambiguity of the scene is compounded by the fact that the story is being told by a young lady in the company of other wealthy young ladies and young men who have themselves escaped from Florence, which is ridden with a plague, to enjoy themselves for a brief time in isolation at a country villa. More than that, it's Boccaccio's rejoinder to a famous scene in the Inferno in Dante's Circle of the Heretics, notably the materialist heretics, those who held with Epicurus that, quote, spirit dies when body dies. And once again, it's a field of tombs. The tombs are open. The lids rest to the side. Dante is speaking with the heretic Farinata, political strongman in the Florence of 2 generations past. Farinata had joined his fellow Ghibellines in waging war against his own city, that when they were flush with victory and ready to raze the city to the ground, Farinata stood for Florence and against them, as he puts it, her sole defender in the sight of all. That's not enough for the Florentines to forgive him, so that when his party loses power, he and his whole family are driven out of Florence and are still in exile when Dante the Pilgrim speaks with him. Farinata is, in other words, a failed patriot, perhaps a failed patriot precisely because his cramped materialism prevented him from seeing any farther than the fortunes of his own family and his party. And in this regard, I think, what would a modern secularist do if he were present at the raising of Lazarus? I think probably he would go over to somebody and ask whether Lazarus was a Democrat or a Republican. That would be the most important thing about the scene. I think actually that a lot of critics in English literature would ask a comparable and utterly irrelevant question. Now, while Dante and Farinata are speaking, just after Dante has revealed to Farinata that his family still alienated from the city, another soul rises up in the same tomb, not nimbly but weakly, tentatively. His chin rests upon the edge. He is Cavalcante dei Cavalcanti, father of Guido. He also had the reputation of being an Epicurean heretic. He assumes incorrectly that Dante has embarked upon his journey by means of what he calls genius at its height. Evidently, he still cannot believe in such things as grace and forgiveness of sin. There's only power. Here, not the power of the sword and party strife, as belonged to Farinata, but the power of the isolated human mind, of genius at its height, It's basically the two things that we encourage our students to believe in, okay? Political and economic power, or just sheer, isolated, wonderful individual genius, which doesn't exist. "Where is my son?" Cavalcanti cries out. "Why is he not with you?" Strange question to ask somebody who's going through hell, by the way. Dante doesn't know what to make of this. Guido was his best friend, yes, but the old man is in error, says Dante. "I haven't come here on my own. He who stands waiting leads me through this place. For 1 year, Guido may be held in scorn." The old man hears nothing of what Dante says, nothing except one verb, rather the tense of one verb. He drew upright and cried, what do you mean? You said he held. Isn't he still alive? Has the sweet sunlight ceased to strike his eyes?" And he slumps back into the tomb before Dante can reply. This bears some examination. Dante's reply is meant to disabuse the old man of the supposition of aloneness, of self-sufficiency. "I'm not here on my own," he says, meaning that he's not relying simply upon his own genius. Virgil is there with him, and Virgil is leading him through hell, as I read it, for the sake of someone else, whom Guido might have scorned. That can only be Beatrice, and beyond Beatrice, Christ. We remember that the only reason Virgil is on the journey is that Beatrice herself, the beautiful young woman, had come down to him to beg him to help her amico, her friend, or rather her beloved, who had lost his way in the dark forest. "Lucevano gli occhi suoi più che la stella," said Virgil in describing his first sight of her. Her eyes were shining brighter than the stars. And Virgil responded to her immediately, not by intellectual argument, but in sudden love. For he too is like a young man in this scene, moved by the beauty of this blessed young woman. Indeed, a whole communion of young love. Mary and Lucy and Rachel stand behind Beatrice, and the bonds of that communion are with Dante still, as he tries to respond to the old father of his wayward friend, Guido. What we have here is the irreconcilability, the incommunicability of existential age and existential youth. For the materialist, there is a lid on the world, as at the end of time, those lids in the Inferno, too, will be bolted upon the tombs. That means that Farinata, the failed patriot, and Cavalcanti, the failed father, will be imprisoned in their personal pasts. Despite the fact that Guido is actually Farinata's son-in-law, these two old men do not speak to one another. What is there to say? For what is there to know? There will come a time, says Farinata to Dante, when each of the damned will be trammeled up in his own memory. This is not a recovery of childhood. Not at all. For them, there will be nothing in the time beyond time, says Farinata. Now you can understand that evermore dead will be all our knowledge from the time the future ends and judgment shuts the door. But Dante, by contrast, is slowly being prepared for the time when he will meet Beatrice, that young woman, again. Do not worry about Farinata's prophecy that you too will be cast into exile, says Virgil, as they walk away from the tomb. For, says Virgil, when you shall come before the radiance of that sweet soul whose lovely eye sees all, from her you'll learn the journey of your life. From her he will learn that future and much more. From the young lady whom he first met, as he tells us in the poetry of his youth, and as he will tell us again when he first glimpses her in earthly paradise, before he left the seasons of a boy. Beatrice will guide him along a journey of humility, and thus of ever-refreshed newness, of childlike openness to wonder, till he finally stands in the sight of God and finds himself in the bursting fullness of his vision as speechless as a babe, quote, that wets his tongue still at his mother's breast. We must think of the Christ child here, to whom the pilgrim poet is being conformed, as Father Sayward writes, till adulthood deceives them. All Toms and Thomasinas are Thomists, philosophers of essay, celebrants of the beauty of being. That is why, as Chesterton reminds us, the small child cannot possibly be a pessimist. He, quote, does not fall into pessimism, he falls into the pond. So Dante ends his comedy by falling into the pond, the ocean of love. What Dante cannot express in words, like a small child wetting his tongue still at his mother's breast, Fra Angelico, in his famous Last Judgment, painted for the Dominican house of San Marco in Florence, attempts to show us in red and blue and green and gold. Again, we have an avenue of tombs dramatically occupying the center of the painting. The lids are removed, scattered here and there. They're all empty. The avenue vanishes at the horizon, which is lit by the gleam of silver light, with the deep blue of heaven beyond. What Fra Angelico portrays here is not simply the empty tomb of the risen Christ, but the emptiness of the tomb, the nothingness of a life without Jesus. To one side are souls in a confused riot, a sort of mass loneliness, the modern world, being herded like sheep into hell. To the other side stand a communion of the blessed. Among them are virgins and martyrs, monks and bishops, popes, kings, commoners. They are united both in prayer, as they look upward in adoration of the Lord Jesus, and in love for one another, as they speak and embrace like long-lost friends from youth. And their faces are rosy and beautiful. The chins of the men are as smooth as the chins of boys. It is impossible to fix their age. And that, I suppose, is the very point. For they too now have come in unto the altar of God who gives strength to their youth. They are young beyond age. They are like the beautiful boyish Jesus of Caravaggio's First Supper at Emmaus, too young for the age-worn disciples to recognize until the moment of the breaking of the bread. Now, as if their joy were not enough already, Fra Angelico has painted a garden of flowers to their side, where smaller figures dance in a ring, hand in hand. They look to be angel and child, all of them wearing crowns of glory. It is another way of expressing the life of life, the heart of bliss. Why children? Because everything comes to the child as gift. Therefore, the gift of everything comes to the child. Power over in all its impotence, and being against in all its nonentity, are shown in the frenzied scenes of hell. But the children bask like flowers in the glow of being and love. Know you not that we shall judge angels, says St. Paul. And know you not that we shall hold their hands, says the blessed Angelico. What if we, old and tattered as we are, could be but born again? What if we could strip ourselves of our confining robes of avarice, self-regard, worldly wisdom, being all that you can be, an ugly phrase for the army of all things, of knowing that nothing is worth our devotion, and what if we could strip all that away, and like the brave lad Francis in the Piazza of Assisi, stand naked as a babe in the freedom of love? What if we could beg the Lord, that mighty babe in the manger, to shove the lid of our tomb aside, that we might toddle our newborn limbs over to the garden of the children to dance? What can make the old man young? I consider here the words of Polixenes in Shakespeare's Winter's Tale. He is musing wistfully upon the childhood he enjoyed with his friend, now King Leontes. We were, fair queen, he says to Leontes' wife, we were, fair queen, two lads that thought there was no more behind but such a day tomorrow as today, and to be boy eternal. Now we know that cannot be. We grow old, and we sin, and we grow old in sin. That agedness has taken its corrupting place in his friend Leontes, who overhears this conversation, an innocent conversation, between his friend and the queen, and who seethes with murderous jealousy. Something or someone far more powerful than reminiscence does it take, not to restore us to our bygone youth, but to make us truly new. But the aged skepticism of our day denies that there is such a thing or such a person, or rather forgets that there ever was such a person to deny. So when the critic comes upon the plays of Shakespeare's age, which are touched with youth, as with the golden aureoles of Fra Angelico, he sees at best nostalgia, at worst a fair but flimsy robe to soften the desire for brute power. The weary and cynical chatter is of controlling the sexuality of women, or of ensuring dynastic succession, or affirming the power of artistic illusion, never of chaste and holy love, of being born again, or of the real and profound mystery of a world governed by the beauty that is of old and is ever new. So let us gather with Shakespeare beside another tomb. This time the tomb is the sea itself, the vast sea. A noble young lad, Ferdinand, wanders about the shore of an island. He has swum from what he believes to be a sinking ship, with his father drowned in the wreck. Yet he hears music. It seems to arise from the island and from the sea themselves. Says he, sitting on a bank, weeping again the king my father's wrack, this music crept by me upon the waters, allaying both their fury and my passion with its sweet air. Thence have followed it, or it hath led me, rather. It is apparently a healing music, calms both the sea and Ferdinand's grieving heart. But it suggests a power, unlike a mere anodyne, that reaches down into the depths of being. Hear the words of the song now. Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. What do you make of these words? Critics don't make any of them now. Song is both threatening and promising, though the promise is veiled in allegory. It seems to suggest with frank certainty that Ferdinand's father, sinful king of Naples by the name of Alonso, is dead. His bones are being transformed into dead coral, his eyes into dead pearl. But coral is mysterious and beautiful, and the pearls recall the parable of Jesus, that the kingdom of God may be compared to a man who found a pearl of great price and who then sold all he had to purchase that pearl. What is richer than a king? What is more wondrous than a sinner? No less than an innocent child. And an innocent child, in this scene from Shakespeare's Tempest, is exactly whom Ferdinand is about to meet. Prospero, the old and wronged Duke of Milan, ousted from his throne by his wicked brother Antonio, who engineered the evil with the assistance of King Alonso of Naples. This Prospero was shipwrecked on an island with his infant daughter Miranda. There, with his books of magic, he has managed to survive. Now, 14 years later, he has whipped up the storm that has apparently shipwrecked Alonso and Ferdinand and the rest of their retainers and their crew. Miranda has in the meantime grown to be a lovely young woman. Prospero indeed desires that Miranda and Ferdinand should meet and should fall in love with one another. It's part of his plan to reconcile the royal family of Naples with the royal family of Milan. But the aim is higher than that. We shall see in this play far more than a social order restored. We shall see a dead man, Alonso, rise to newness of life. The central figure in this resurrection is a child, Miranda. Their hearts hardened by the aged concerns of political power, contemporary critics miss the fact that nothing in the Tempest can be brought to its joyful conclusion without the innocence and the spiritual beauty of Miranda. She is, as her name suggests, both a source and an object of wonder. When her father and she, then a little child, were exposed by Antonio and Alonso in a rotten hull on the high seas, she was the instrument of his salvation. "What trouble was I then to you?" exclaims Miranda, with characteristic selflessness. But Prospero corrects her. "No trouble. Oh, a cherubim thou wast that did preserve me. Thou didst smile infuse it with a fortitude from heaven, when I have decked the sea with drops full salt, under my burden groaned. Prospero added his groans to the winds and his tears to the whelming sea. But this little baby girl, this Miranda, infused or poured full of fortitude from the heavens above, smiles in her purity and saves him, as if she were the childlike guardian angel of her guardian. She it is who now sees the sorrowing Ferdinand, first young man she's ever seen in her life. When Prospero explains to her that he is not a spirit, but a human being of humble flesh and blood, such as they are, Miranda tells us what she thinks of him. Implicitly, she tells us what we would think of mankind if we and mankind were like Miranda, if we and mankind were innocent. She says, I might call him a thing divine, for nothing natural I ever saw so noble. Think of that, a thing divine. Maybe Chesterton had that moment in mind in The Ball and the Cross, when a brash young Catholic, Evan McKeon, tells his atheist friend and his antagonist that he must fight him, not because he thinks little of him. He's not fighting the atheist because he thinks little of him, but because he thinks much. In fact, he must fight him because he thinks that he is divine and fights for that divinity. Ferdinand, for his part, looks upon Miranda and addresses her, "Oh, you wonder." They are falling in love, exactly as Prospero longs that they should, though for a short time he will pretend suspicion of Ferdinand to make him suffer patiently to win his daughter's hand. That winning will culminate in a scene rich in Christian paradox, in all those truths to which the old world is blind, that he who humbles himself in love is already exalted. The kingdom of God is among us now. We needn't wait for that exaltation. It occurs in the act of humility itself. And he who binds his heart in love is set free. Feminists care to listen to this, I hope. I don't know. All the Renaissance poets believe the same thing. Marriage is that paradoxical bond that liberates. People don't get it. Says Miranda to Ferdinand. Miranda, she's never seen a boy before, and she doesn't know the custom that the boy is supposed to offer himself first, is supposed to speak up. Miranda is innocent of those customs. She's, however, simple, not simplistic, simple in the singleness of her heart. So she says to Ferdinand, hence bashful cunning, hence Machiavelli, hence bashful cunning, and prompt me, plain and holy innocence. I am your wife, if you will marry me. If not, I'll die your maid. To be your fellow you may deny me, but I'll be your servant, whether you will or no. That's the essence of the Christian vision of the world. At which point Ferdinand answers appropriately, falls to his knees, cries out, my mistress, dearest, and I thus humble ever. Miranda can hardly believe her bliss here, her good fortune. My husband, then? Asks Miranda. I, says Ferdinand, in a line that nobody understands anymore. I, with a heart as willing as bondage heir of freedom. How old, how callous, how insensible is the world by comparison. For while Ferdinand and Miranda are blossoming out into love, the other men from the boat are wandering the island. They include the sinners Antonio and Alonso. The king of Naples, now, he believes that his son Ferdinand is dead, and he is inconsolable. We watch him endure a kind of living death, so that he may come to life again. But Antonio suffers no such grief. While the king and his courtiers take some sleep on the grassy isle, Antonio and Alonso's brother Sebastian apparently wide awake, discuss what they should do now. Antonio suggests that Sebastian and he should murder the king so that Sebastian might take the crown of Naples for himself. It's, of course, an act of complete amorality, such as Machiavelli, at his most hard-hearted, would approve, if not admire. But the language Shakespeare uses to describe their conversation is strangely revealing. The Tempest is filled with unearthly music, visions of moral truth, dreams so beautiful that even the monster Caliban says he'd think the heavens would open and drop riches upon him, making him weep to dream again. But Antonio and Sebastian, the worldly wise, the modern, the grown-up, they find nothing of note on this isle. Nothing that a child would mark and love. Nothing but rocks and barren turf. They have no eyes to see because they've grown old in sin. Yet when Antonio suggests the murder, he couches it in terms of a dream. Worthy Sebastian, oh, what might, no more, and yet methinks I see it in thy face, what thou shouldst be. The occasion speaks thee, and my strong imagination sees a crown dropping upon thy head. The occasion, the opportunity. It's not a child's dream of substantial good coming to him as a gift from without. The old sinner's self-woven specter of insubstantial evil, which he would snatch for himself. It is a kind of unwonder. I can coin a word. It's an antithaumaton. Even Sebastian, who is not a good man, can hardly believe that Antonio is awake. What is it thou didst say? This is a strange repose, to be asleep with eyes wide open, standing, speaking, moving, yet so fast asleep. Sebastian speaks more truly than he knows. Call it the spiritual sluggishness, the acedia of the worldly nimble, or the will-o'-the-wisps of the materialist imagination. For Antonio, there is no such thing as genuine moral authority, as he points to his ducal garments, and he notes that they fit him much better than they did before he stole Milan from his brother Prospero. As for his conscience, what of that? He cannot find this supposed deity in his bosom. If it were a chilblain on his heel, he would know what to do with it then. Wear loose slippers. Their conspiracy is thwarted by Prospero and his loyal spirit Ariel, but how poor and weak they really are appears when they and Alonso are finally brought to Prospero's cell. There Alonso, more king now than ever, still believing that his son is drowned, gives Milan back to Prospero before he asks it, and begs forgiveness. But that is only the prelude to a greater gift in return. Prospero draws a curtain, and there in the inner room of his cell are the two young people, Ferdinand and Miranda, playing chess, teasing one another, charmed by the charms of love. A most high miracle, cries Sebastian of all people. Ferdinand falls to his knees before his father, who blesses him, while Miranda, the maiden beyond any one of the company in goodness and the wisdom that goodness brings, seeing what for her is a veritable crowd of people, Miranda exclaims, "O wonder! How many goodly creatures are there here! How beauteous mankind is! O brave new world that has such people in it!" These are her final and crowning words in the play. They are not naive, not as I see it, but childlike. Miranda does not know the evil of the world's ways. Because she does not know that, she sees the eternal reality of man rather than the passing unreality. To her, then, Alonso turns, and in the culmination of grace, in the last pangs of his new birth, he falls before his daughter-to-be, the very little girl whom he conspired with Antonio to murder on the high seas. He falls before that girl, whose power is the power of love. I am hers, he says. But oh, how oddly it will sound that I must ask my child forgiveness, which is, of course, a thing that all Christians must do. Of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. And he set a child in their midst. So read Peter with a hitch in his voice as the Cratchit children surrounded him, the crutch of their lost brother Tim lying alone in a corner. And Scrooge regarded them. Scrooge made one in their love of a little child, and his heart fairly broke with remorse. And all the old dismal wisdom of his world, of his material mind, and his soul of a counting house ledger book fell dead away. When he woke from his dream, which was no dream but truth, and learned that it was still the day when the Christ child was born, Scrooge, in his joy, in his new youth, blurted out his version of the words of Dante before the living God. I don't know anything at all, cried Scrooge. I am quite a baby. That is no sentiment, but the everlasting truth that unites us to God and to one another. It is not the opinion of Dante, or of Shakespeare, or of the poet of Pearl, medieval poem Pearl, who learns wisdom from his little daughter across the river of paradise, nor of Cervantes, when Sancho Panza says that he will never leave his master Don Quixote, because though he is crazy, he has a heart as innocent as a child. Nor the opinion of Dostoevsky, who ends his greatest novel with a scene that no one encrusted with the ancient bark-like tether of sin can understand, as the boys surround Alyosha in a ring and look forward to the resurrection when they will see God and one another, and they cheer, hurrah for Karamazov, the last words in the novel. I say it is not their opinion. It is the inmost truth of our beings. God does not want us to be like little children so that we may always hover just this side of nothing. We are creatures. We must hover just this side of nothing, no matter what we do. No, he wants us to be like little children, that we may be most dear to him and to one another, and therefore most like himself in true power and glory. For the babe in the manger, dwelling among us for love, can hardly move his little hand, who sowed the heavens with stars as thick as grain, cannot speak a word, who is the Word, and who spoke the light into being. The materialist must end by falling down before the big and the hulking, a king or a scientist or a machine or a vast bundle of particles. That is but the working out of spiritual age, ending in blank despair and death. It begins by denying the reality of God and ends by denying the perdurance of our own selves. It begins by denying the love of God and ends by denying the love of man, reducing it to appetite or to the bare imperative of bodily survival. It cannot be born again. It sets no captives free. It is to see all this spangled universe as a tomb and not to notice that the tomb is empty and that he who died is risen. It looks upon the child and sees something less than a pig or a dog, sees a contributor perhaps to our material well-being or a consumer of resources, but nothing wondrous, nothing holy. Then let the words of our Savior, who well knew the hearts of men, ring in our ears. Suffer the little children to come unto me, says he, looking to his disciples and to us now and always. For of such is the kingdom of heaven. How can it be otherwise? For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Thank you. Yeah, and of course, I, being Italian, will be very offended if you don't ask me questions. So you better do that. Yes, sir.
Hi, Doctor. My name's Solomon. Throughout this conference, I've been thinking about things in my life that I like thinking about. Things like love, good people, other wonderful things, and I then thought about things that I don't like, and I can only think of two things: hatred and money.
Money.
And
you're not married, evidently.
I'm not married. I'm not married. Another thing I like is a wonderful conference like this, filled with people who are fighting for the very things that I enjoy to reflect upon. Yet I stand here at Notre Dame, hailing from the University of St. Thomas, cruising through buildings that cost $1 gajillion. I think I might be the only African American here. It feels like the hypocrisy is almost palpable. And when I try to approach these things with the mind and the wonder and the heart of a child, I can't help but feel helpless. So I guess my question is if you could speak to that helplessness.
Let me see if I can give you two answers to this. I used to have that same kind of suspicion. For instance, when I went to Italy for the first time and went into all those wonderful cathedrals like the Duomo in Florence and so forth, I said to myself, my gosh, they spent such money, I was thinking, right, on this. And surely I'm thinking, and it never occurred to me that I was basically repeating the words of Judas. This would have been better off given to the poor. And not realizing that, in fact, the building of these glorious things were the work and the love of those very people that I thought I might have been helping if, say, I had not built that building but given things to them. The poor also need beauty, and they also deserve to be taught, for instance, the wonders of the Christian heritage at places like the U of St. Thomas and perhaps at Notre Dame. That is in fact a good thing. On the other hand, I do notice, even at my own college, that when we celebrate our great alumni, we put on our web pages alumni who have become CEOs of this or that company, or a Supreme Court justice, or head of Harvard Law Review or something like that, and never a woman who got married and had 5 kids and stayed home and raised them, okay, rather than sending them to the asylum. What do they call those places? Daycare centers. Sorry, folks. I don't mean to offend. You see what I mean? We have all gotten caught up in these dreams of power and prestige and influence. And it may be that as an African-American student, you might have a very particular way of reminding us that these are all specters. These are in some ways phony dreams. They're insubstantial. That the heart of our life lies elsewhere. We desperately need to be reminded of that. I think this conference is a great first start. But it would be kind of funny to say to ourselves here, oh yes, I gave a paper at this prestigious conference at the Center for Ethics and Culture, and this will speed me on my way towards bigger and brighter things. I agree that there's something strange about that. Yeah. Sir?
Yeah, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for the refreshing look at the aspects of innocence in Shakespeare. I guess at the risk of sounding like a materialist ghost, if there is such a thing, I just wanted to ask if you could sort of 2 related questions regarding Shakespeare and these binaries between sort of age, materialism, right, and say the political world, and innocence and youth, childhood,
yeah,
as you're setting up the binaries in the Tempest. The first question has to do with the fact that how does the fact that the narrative arc of the Tempest is framed by Prospero's admitted machinations that could gesture towards the recovery of political power, right? I mean, in the beginning, that's what the storm was created in part, to get there. and the conclusion, right, in which we see the clear trajectory that it's going to end in marriage and the reclaiming of his throne, right, as well as his perhaps gentle chastisement of Miranda after, oh, brave new world with such strange people in it, and he responds,
"'Tis new to thee."
"'Tis new to thee," right. So the bigger question would be, how would you see these same binaries working out in a play like King Lear, which, if we're going to talk about Shakespeare and the distinctions between age and youth, innocence, corruptibility, a play in which, well, first of all, hardly anybody comes off looking really angelic, even in their youthfulness, but a play which ends with Edgar, the heir apparent, and the wronged youth, actually sort of homilizing on the aged, right, everyone who's dead, who says, we who are young will never see so much nor live so long, which I'm not sure if you see that and the play that concludes as...
Okay, first question first. I think the critics make altogether too much of Prospero's regaining political power. We know throughout the play that it's one of his faults, in fact. It's a fault that set up the disaster, that he is plainly uninterested in political power. That's why he gave over the de facto rule of Milan to his brother Antonio in the first place. He seems, in the course of the play, to express absolutely no desire on his own part to resume the dukedom, except as he now understands that it was his responsibility to wield power in Milan as a father, responsibility that he failed to fulfill. We have in Prospero a funny kind of childlikeness at various points in the play. He's not a perfect character by far, but he's the one who calls upon the elves of standing lakes and groves and talks delightedly about the small spirits whose job it is to make mushrooms, and the others who run after the waves when they retreat at the seashore and then run back when they come back in a sort of perpetual and childlike play. Prospero is himself in need of redemption, and gains a great measure, perhaps, of that redemption in his refusal to take vengeance upon his enemies. And we do find out from Prospero that his aim in regaining the dukedom will be to devote every third thought to his death, to his end. And the last words that he has in the play are words that come from our Lord's Prayer. He is begging the audience for forgiveness for perhaps not a very good play, so that their applause and their cheers will speed his sails back to Milan, and asks for forgiveness just as we would want forgiveness. I think the critics have just misread Prospero or failed to notice these things because they're just not interested in them. As for the second question was on... Oh, yes. Well, I'd make a distinction between Tempest and King Lear. By the way, King Lear is my favorite play in the history of the world, and Tempest is number 2. The King Lear is clearly set in pre-Christian and pagan England. That is the frame for it. And everybody in the audience knows that. And this presses a kind of pagan wisdom as far as it can go, but no farther. And yet there are hints in the play that there is a rejuvenation to come, but perhaps not here. Okay, perhaps here only in foreshadowings, in intimations. For instance, when King Lear says on Heath to the fool who is clearly suffering and wants to suffer with his master, but also wants to get his master inside, the king, that lordly fellow, says, "In, boy, go first." Okay, we see the king begin now and then, not consistently, to defer in that way. He's the child-changed king. In his that wonderful late scene with Cordelia, when he first recognizes her, they're playing music. The old man has been shaved in the Olivier production, which was brilliant, because now he's got the smooth chin of a child. United with his daughter, the daughter who has just said recently to us, basically echoing the words of the child Jesus, whom she's not aware of. I must be about my Father's business. It is my Father's business I go about. It's there in the character of Edgar. It's not enough in King Lear. Okay, that's how I would answer that. But I think those things have to be seen in King Lear. King Lear is a sort of would-be Christian play, but is not. But then we are in pre-Christian England. Something similar happens with the play Cymbeline, except that, as everybody in the audience knew, Cymbeline was the king sitting on the throne when the Christ child was born. And that, too, is a kind of frame for that particular play, which is a more hopeful play than King Lear. Yes, sir?
Thanks. I love your explication of the Tempest, and I was hoping you could...
Way up there, yeah.
That question of Prospero, and like specifically the speech after the marriage scene where he's talking about the weekend, this weekend, and said this fear and stuff made on.
Yeah.
What is that saying about like existential age and existential...
Prospero is a fascinating character. He lacks the simplicity or the singleness of heart that characterizes his daughter Miranda. He is prone to dark moods. He's prone to thoughts that would thick his blood. That perhaps is one of those moments. Okay. It's a funny thing, though, because if you read it as simple despair, then I think you've probably missed the connection to the similar speech in the play by Antonio, as I mentioned here in the talk, when Antonio is saying to Sebastian, "I see a crown dropping upon thy head." Okay, what Prospero does see is the insubstantiality of most of what we consider great and marvelous. Whether he has a full vision of the substantiality of goodness is another question, but I think a different question. I think he does have a vision of that substantiality, but in his dark moods. Remember, he knows that new conspirators are out there aiming for his very life. That would tend to, darken your mind. But I don't think Prospero rests in that mood. He has that. We have to acknowledge that. This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine, he says, referring to Caliban. And perhaps even at the end he doesn't understand that Caliban also has been redeemed. But it is that same Prospero who begs for forgiveness also. I would say that if you apply it to what has just gone on stage, that is the revels, then you may be pushing it too far. The revels are also things that are kind of ignored by the critics, but what Prospero is giving to Miranda and Ferdinand there is a sort of morality play about the goodness of the natural world, the goodness of the body, the holiness of marriage, and how all of these things fit together for good, for ripeness of harvest, for children and bounty, the bounty of God, and the bounty of God's minister nature. I think that vision is not insubstantial, and it may be Prospero's proneness to being disheartened that speaks in that speech. But the speech, I think, cannot be taken just as it is and applied to everything. It needs to be set off against similar speeches about visions and dreams and other moments that Prospero has, where he clearly loves the natural world and loves goodness. Yes?
Yeah, Andrew Weiss, a student at Holy Cross College. I have a question.
You're at Holy Cross?
Yes, sir.
That's just up the road from me.
No,
at
Holy
Providence.
Cross College here in Notre Dame.
Oh, okay, that
across the
whole,
street,
okay,
actually, yeah.
all right. I was going to say, I didn't expect anybody from Holy Cross here.
It happens all the time, though. I have a question. How would you respond, and how would you suggest that maybe we as undergraduates and students of the university, and even people in society as a whole, how would you suggest we respond to the modern Machiavellian ideology that's generally predominant, I would say, that would condemn you for your childlike innocence kind of ideas, as saying that they are inapplicable to reality and idealistic, because I find that that is a common argument against this childlike innocence and this culture of love, which we believe in as Christians.
Laugh at the bastards.
All right, that sounds good.
Do they deserve to be taken more seriously than that? I wonder at people in my own line of work whose heaven seems to be a faculty senate meeting. You can have it. Certainly nobody can accuse the preacher of being sentimental, but when the preacher says that it is also the duty of man to eat, drink, and be merry, he's on to something there. There is no mirth in the academy. There is no, and I see it. My school is a little bit different, but I see out there the applications for jobs that I've been reading in the last couple of weeks. We have a medievalist job in my department, so I've gone through about 120 or so applications. And it's all one political gimmick after another, and I wonder whether any of them really love literature. My suggestion to you is to fall in love and to have fun. I mean, the Machiavellians are going to do what the Machiavellians do. It's all, as Shakespeare, I think, saw through to the end of this. It's all insubstantial and pointless in the end. I mean, let them have their real world if they like. It's a real world of shadows. It's non-entity. But you too can, for instance, be the most famous bibliographer of Henry Vaughan or something, and smoke a pack a day and be divorced twice with kids who never really want to see you, and go to departmental meetings among people you don't really like, so that you can stab one another in the back with toothpicks and needles. That too can be your life if you aspire to that, but why bother? So my first advice is, be a kid. Sure, there are the Machiavellians out there, but in their heart of hearts, I think they know that they have really nothing. You think their smiles are not mirthful? No, just laugh at them. Sorry, maybe I'll think of something more practical, something that involves resurrecting some instrument of early Enlightenment torture. But right now, I think laughter is the best. We got another question. We have time for one more question? One more question. Way up there, yes. Sorry.
Well, that's just this way.
Okay.
So, your talk was beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
I was wondering, actually, you may have actually already answered this question just now, but I'll ask it anyway. Just the way you talk about these poets and these texts, my gut reaction is to think, wow, if only the materialist would read these, then.
Yeah. Well, if only people had been present when Jesus raised Lazarus from the tomb.
But if only we'd read that, then would there be hope? My thought is that there might be hope for him to be saved somehow from his isolation and to see life to be more. And I was wondering, is it really just as simple as that? They could only read it.
Well, sometimes it is. I do think that this literature can be a great tool for evangelism. The literature and the art and the music. I just wonder, it depends on how. Well, God is in control of everything. I'm not going to set limits on the grace of God. Stranger things can happen than that a materialist should grow a metaphysical mind. But the people I think that really need to hear this literature and see this art first are young people. And there's a funny thing that I was going through all these applications for our medievalist job, right? And over I'm reading in the applications about how difficult it is to get young people to be interested in what they call pre-modern literature. I like the word pre-modern. I rather think of what we have now as post-medieval, but it's all this pre-modern stuff. Then to show its, get a load of this word, right? Relevance, all right? And I said to myself, after I've just seen it over and over, I'm seeing this in these self-promoting letters of introduction. I don't have any trouble introducing my students to literature of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. I have no trouble at all, because the literature is beautiful. And my students live in an otherwise drab world. I mean, they're given love poetry. There isn't any love poetry out there. All at once, they read beautiful things about these two kinds of creatures that used to live on the earth. They were so different from one another, but they were fascinated with one another. They found one another glorious and beautiful and frustrating. What are they called? Men and women, right? And they read about this, and it intrigues them because they've never seen anything like that before. Not in mass entertainment, and certainly not in their courses. Most of it they went to the government schools. They haven't seen that, and many of them react to it quite strongly. I mean, my gosh! I mean, this is something really to give your life for in doing. You become a student of this sort of literature. This is something that can really guide me. This has not so much changed my mind as maybe really given me a mind for the first time. And I think that wonders can be done especially with young people. I find that the young people, at least the ones that I teach, right, at Providence College, they're not hostile to this vision because they've already been scorched by the vision of pointless sex and cynicism and snideness, Family Guy and stuff like that. They've already been scorched by that. They see that that's empty. Why should they be hostile to somebody who offers something? Nobody else is offering anything. So in that sense, we have the field all to ourselves. The others have simply forfeited the game. And I've had students be converted by Renaissance poetry, and one of them who was baptized last spring, and now is the head of RCIA at Providence College. He came as an atheist in his freshman year, but he had this unfortunate weakness for the poetry of Milton, and so even that kind of grumpy Protestant. But Milton got to him, and Dante got to him, and if he says now that if you want to remain an atheist, you really have to watch out what books you read and what company you keep. Anyway, I guess I've got a plane to catch, but thank you all, and thank you all for coming in. It's been a great conference, this.